I think it's fair to say that Lies of P captured a lot of attention and imaginations when it dropped in the fall of 2023. Any game trailer that looks even vaguely Bloodborne-esque tends to have gamers foaming at the mouth, myself included, but the idea of a public domain character Soulslike sounded equally silly and promising. What we eventually got was a standout example of the action exploration genre, keeping familiar elements from its predecessors and then adding just enough to keep things spicy, in addition to telling an emotional and sometimes difficult story about what humanity really is. Set in the fictional European city of Krat, the game casts the player as P, short for Pinocchio, just after the train carrying you into the city crashes in the station. Apparently, the mechanical puppets that the city is known for have all simultaneously gone crazy and begun to violate the in-universe version of the laws of robotics, known as the Grand Covenant. Human bodies litter the streets, but P is directed to fight his way through it to make it to the massive Hotel Krat, where some mysteries may begin to be answered at last. The game takes the traditional Dark Souls format, enemies and health restorations respawn at checkpoints, and enemies grant EXP when killed that you use to bump up your stats one by one, and adds multiple new ideas to it, the biggest of which is Pinocchio's extra Legion arm abilities. His arm can feature attachments that range from a puppet string that yanks enemies closer, to a miniature flamethrower to proximity mines that can help interrupt combo attacks. The titular lies are what sets him apart from other puppets, in addition to the fact that he hasn't gone insane. The very first part of the Grand Covenant states that puppets cannot lie, and yet he will have to in order to progress on his quest, slowly bringing him further and further from his original nature and pushing him towards something altogether more human. The Overture expansion is a prequel that sees Pinocchio from near the end of the base game, seemingly transported back in time to shortly before the horrific puppet frenzy. I got to try a few small tastes of what's in store in this experience, but keep in mind that I am largely lacking in context as I didn't get to see how the expansion is initiated and was instead dropped right at the first checkpoint. The first part of my demo experience was an exploration of part of the first act, set on a snowy mountain just outside of the Krat Zoo. This was my first taste of the new freeze status effect, which does basically just what it says on the tin, stopping you cold should you get hit too many times with it. Crossing through the mountains to see the massive, opulent zoo building felt a bit like the reveal of Rapture beneath the sea, a glorious monument to art and culture where one isn't being expected, and one on the verge of absolute destruction if it's not already in progress. Moving into the zoo area proper, I got a taste of the myriad of new foes in store in addition to the typical puppets and carcasses found in the main game. Players should expect a Parasite Eve level of animal body horror in this title, including multiple foes that transform into more gruesome and terrifying monsters mid-fight. A fight through the exhibition building let me out into the animal habitats behind it, where even more terror and destruction awaited, culminating in a fight with a terrifyingly fast giant alligator, which I beat right before the buzzer indicating time was up. This part only had access to a few new weapons, but the most notable was a bow, the game's first ranged weapon with no limit on ammo. It works how you'd expect, with the light attack being a quick firing combo and the heavy being a timed charged shot. And it feels satisfying, but is definitely not effective against bosses. You just can't devote the time to sit and charge your heavy shots, or grind the weapon's sharpness as the bow frequently requires. But it definitely feels satisfying to take out smaller foes as they're approaching you, and doing so won't draw aggression from their friends unless you're in their line of sight already. Speaking of bosses, the other half of the demo was a preview of the game's boss refighting feature that's coming alongside the Overture DLC, called Battle Memories. Not only were all of the major bosses from the base game available, but I also got my fill of battle against the first 3 bosses in the expansion. I couldn't capture footage from this section and wouldn't really want to show too much for fear of spoilers, but to answer the most obvious questions, you get placed at a Stargazer right outside the boss room, and there is no material reward to refighting bosses. You will not get a second ergo for beating a base game boss, which also makes sense for in-story reasons. Each boss has 5 tiers of difficulty, of which the first 3 will be initially available, with the 4th and 5th being sequentially unlocked after defeating tier 3. The developers were asked which tier corresponded to the base game's main challenge level, but unfortunately did not give a direct answer, so it seems we're not meant to know yet, if at all. Speaking of difficulty, the base game is also receiving a pretty sizable patch when Overture debuts, the most significant feature of which will be new, easier difficulty levels. These are intended for players who are more interested in the narrative experience of Lies of P than its challenging combat, which feels like a worthwhile group to consider given that this game is much more story-focused than many of its peers. The game's original level of challenge will now be referred to as the Legendary Stalker, with the easiest and next easiest being Butterfly's Guidance and Awakened Puppet, respectively. If you're looking to turn up the heat instead, the other boss rush mode being added to the base game is the inverse of Battle Memories. Death March mode will let the player create essentially a playlist of bosses to battle one right after the other, with a minimum of 3 fights but potentially running the full gauntlet from beginning to end. As with Battle Memories, you'll have tiers 1 through 3 unlocked right away, but you have to beat tier 3 to get to the higher levels. Both boss rush modes will be available from the Hotel Stargazer once the game has been beaten at least once. Lies of P Overture feels like it could be a bold step into expanding on the world of Krat and seeing it from new, majestic angles. If there's one thing that was really emphasized to us during the preview event, it was that the team was flexing their full creative muscle on this expansion, bolstered by the support they've gotten from an extremely passionate player base. But it also looks to expand that player base by allowing those who want a more story-driven experience to get to try the game on their terms, and that has me even more excited to see what will happen to its community when it finally arrives in our hands. Lies of P Overture will release in summer 2025 for PC, Xbox, and PlayStation 5. Thanks for watching. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers providing independent gaming coverage through news, reviews, previews, and more. Check out our Patreon to help support our continued growth and subscribe to keep up with all of our future content.
Noisy Pixel.